You stopped chasing. You didn't announce it. You didn't post about it. You didn't tell your friends you were done, because you had been saying that for months and every time you said it. You ended up crossing the street to their apartment at midnight with some excuse that fooled no one. This time was different. This time you didn't say anything. You simply quietly stopped being available in the way they had come to expect. You let a day pass without texting. Then another. Then a week, and instead of the panic you had braced for, something else arrived. A strange, almost disorienting calm. As if a frequency you had been tuned to for years had finally gone silent, and your whole body had to relearn what stillness sounded like. Here is the truth most people never get to hear from someone who isn't trying to sell them something. The avoidant does not come back because you are impossible to replace. They come back because you became impossible to read. For years, your nervous system had been an open book to them. They knew which buttons to press. They knew the exact silence that would bring you running. They knew which version of their absence would trigger your pursuit. And that predictability, even when it hurt you, was the spine of their emotional architecture. Not because they were cruel. Because predictable love felt safe enough to stay close to without getting overwhelmed. The moment you disrupted that predictability, their system faltered. Not because you played a move. Because you stopped playing. Let me take you inside what is actually happening in their biology. Because this is not about strategy. This is about survival software that was installed long before they met you. When you were consistently available, consistently chasing, consistently offering warmth without demanding reciprocity. Their attachment system was operating on what neuroscientists call intermittent reinforcement without the interruption. Meaning the reward was coming on a steady schedule, and steady rewards, predictably, do not spike dopamine the way unpredictable ones do. The brain gets used to them. The brain begins to treat them as baseline. Their nervous system was, at some unconscious level, bored by your devotion in a way they would be ashamed to admit and could not have articulated anyway. Your love had become furnishing, part of the room, not the thing they looked at, but then you stopped. And the absence of a familiar reward is neurologically identical to the threat of a lost resource. Dopamine, which had been coasting on your steady presence, suddenly drops. Cortisol climbs to fill the gap. The amygdala, always scanning for what has changed in the environment, registers the change as danger. They do not in that moment think, I have lost someone I cherish. They feel in their body something more like a tremor, a low-grade arrhythmia of attachment. They wake up at 3 a.m. and check their phone, not because they have anything to say, because the shape of the lock screen, the absence of your name under it, has begun to feel like an amputation. This is the moment you have to understand with both your mind and your body. They are not missing you in the way you missed them when they went quiet. They are missing the regulation your presence provided. You were, without knowing it, co-regulating their nervous system. Each of your texts was a tiny dose of certainty. Each of your double messages, even the ones that embarrassed you, was a small hormonal event in their body that said, you still exist in someone's emotional world. When you remove that supply without warning, you are not punishing them. You are forcing their nervous system to self-regulate for the first time in years. And self-regulation, for someone whose earliest wiring taught them that their feelings were too much, is an almost unbearable demand. So the symptoms begin. They call, they text. They reach out with an old memory, a song reference. This made me think of you with no further context. They send messages at strange hours, the hours when the defenses are thinnest, when the dark has made them honest in ways daylight will not permit. They sound almost tender, almost regretful. Almost like the person you had been waiting for. And here is where you have to remain extraordinarily still, because the greatest danger is not their absence. It is their return. The version of them that comes back in the first 6 weeks after you withdrew is not the version of them that has changed. It is the version of them that is starving. Picture this with me. They are sitting in their car outside your favorite coffee shop, the one they said was fine when they meant they didn't care. They are not going in. They are just parked there, engine off, cup of something cooling in the holder. Imagining what it would be like to walk in, and have you look up and smile at them the way you used to before they earned that smile. They are rehearsing an apology they cannot quite finish, because the apology, if they are honest, is not the point. The point is that they can feel you slipping out of their emotional vocabulary, and for someone whose identity has been built partly on being wanted, that slippage is a kind of death. This is the moment the power has fully inverted, and I want you to feel the weight of it without romanticizing it. Because the inversion itself is not the victory. The victory is what you do with it. Most people, when they reach this point, do one of two things. They either surge forward and reclaim the relationship with a vengeance, as if to prove they were always worthy, and they reattach to a person who has not yet learned how to hold them. Or they collapse into smugness, they weaponize the distance. They perform unbothered so loudly that the unbothered becomes its own kind of desperate choreography. Both of these moves guarantee that the pattern will replay, because the pattern was never about chasing. It was about the nervous system's relationship with being met. So what actually changes the cycle? What breaks the loop so thoroughly that it never returns in the same form? It is not patience. It is not punishment. It is not even the long, dramatic confrontation you have rehearsed in your head. It is something quieter and infinitely harder. It is the moment you stop interpreting their return as a referendum on your worth. You stop treating their reaching out as proof that you were right all along. You stop trying to convert their hunger into a permanent, reliable, mutual tenderness. You let their reaching out be what it is, a nervous system trying to restore a familiar regulation, and you decide from the deepest, most settled place in your body whether that regulation is something you are still willing to provide. This is where the brutal reframe lies, and I need you to hear it without flinching. You are not obligated to be someone's nervous system medicine simply because their absence once wounded you. You are not required to metabolize the unresolved childhood of a person who used your softness as a container for their chaos. You do not owe anyone the gift of your consistency when they have taught you, over and over, that consistency is the very thing that makes them want to leave. This is not bitterness. This is the cleanest, most honest boundary a grown person can hold. And if they are doing real work, real, unglamorous, technically difficult work on themselves, if they have sought out therapy that is not performative, if they have begun to tolerate the discomfort of their own feelings without outsourcing the regulation to a partner, if they can sit across from you at a restaurant and hear you say, "I need you to show up more consistently," without retreating into the safe, ancient fog of detachment, then something has changed. Something has genuinely changed, and you can meet that person slowly with the new shape of yourself intact, without collapsing the growth you've just built. But if they come back the same shape they left in, if their tenderness is a craving rather than a transformation, if their words sound like the earliest version of them, you fell in love with rather than the latest version of them who has finally understood what they cost you, then the kindest act available to you, the one that will haunt them far longer than any revenge, is to remain at a distance that is dignified. Not angry, not cold, just removed in the way a person gets removed when they have finally found a life that no longer requires someone else's permission. Here is the identity shift, and this is where the script closes. You are not the version of yourself that was desperate for them to come back. You are not the version of yourself who checked their last scene at midnight. You are not the version of yourself who shrank their own needs to fit inside the narrow emotional container of a person who has spent a lifetime refusing to grow. You are the version of yourself who walked away from the wrong kind of love without becoming bitter about love itself. You are the version of yourself who learned to self-regulate under conditions that would have broken a less resilient heart. You are the version of yourself who understands now that your tenderness is not a liability. Your tenderness is a frequency, and the right person will not only hear it, they will lean into it. They will not flinch when it lands. They will not mistake it for pressure. So when they come back, and they will, because the pattern almost always closes its loop at least once, you meet them from this new ground. You do not collapse. You do not perform. You do not audition. You simply show them the shape of someone whose nervous system has stopped bracing for them, and you let that shape speak for itself. And if they cannot meet that shape, if their eyes slide away from it, if their body begins its familiar retreat into coolness and unavailability, you know what to do. You already know. You have already done it once. You can do it again, with less choreography this time, with less needing them to understand, with the quiet, almost gentle certainty of someone who has stopped trying to win a game whose rules were never fair. You were never too much. You were never too needy. You were never too intense. You were loving in a frequency that their nervous system had never been trained to receive. That is not your flaw. That is their limitation. And your job now, the one sacred job that remains, is to stop rehearsing your life around someone else's capacity, to let their absence become room, to let their return become optional, and to let your own becoming become the only love story that matters. Stop checking the phone. Stop refreshing the page. Stop translating their silence into your worth. Let tonight be the first night in a long time where your last thought before sleep is not about them, but about the life you are quietly, patiently, in your own time, building without them in it. Because that life, that textured, tender, unmistakably yours life, is the one that was always waiting underneath the waiting, and it is finally allowed to begin.